The Knowledgeable Provider podcast is intended primarily to entertain, also to inform, but it is not a substitute for actual medical training and should not be used by anyone to diagnose or treat any medical condition in themselves or others. If you need medical advice, please make an appointment to see your own knowledgeable medical provider. The opinions expressed by me and anyone else who happens to appear on the podcast are solely those of the people expressing them and are not necessarily representative of any other entities. Other than the lunches at the office, I do not receive any sort of compensation from pharmaceutical or medical device companies, and I have no other relevant financial disclosures. Look, this is all for fun, okay? Don't sue me. All right, on with the show. Hello, welcome back to Knowledgeable Provider. I'm Jody Marks. I have a really interesting conversation for you today that's all about communication. We know that communication is always one of the most important things in medicine, whether we're talking about communicating with each other or communicating with our patients, make sure that our patients are communicating with us. We struggle all the time with getting information from different offices, different healthcare systems. We're all terrible at communicating with each other among offices and providers and whatnot. And one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about in school is how to better communicate with patients and make sure that patients are getting the information that we're throwing out there. And obviously that becomes more challenging when there's some kind of a communication barrier, whether that's someone who speaks a different language or someone who is blind or someone who cannot hear, whatever the case may be. That's when we really have to know what resources are available to us and get creative to figure out how we're going to make it through this encounter, this day, this shift, whatever. And I think communication is probably something we take for granted until we're in a situation where it's not so straightforward. And then we realize how big of a deal it actually is. So today I want to focus on communication with the deaf. My guest is Angie Carmody. She's an American Sign Language interpreter with Huntsville City Schools here in Huntsville, Alabama. She's originally from Indiana. She went to undergrad at Indiana University, majoring in psychology and anthropology, then went to graduate school at Gallaudet University, where she completed a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling with a focus on deaf and hard of hearing people. Moved here to Alabama after graduate school back in 1996 and started working for Madison City Schools. Then she moved to Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind here in Huntsville, where she was case manager for deaf and hard of hearing people. After taking a few years off to raise children, she went back to work at Decatur High School in 2011, and she's been with Huntsville City Schools since 2012. She's worked with every age child in the school system at some point and has also done several other interpreting jobs that she will talk about during the interview. Her husband, Leyland, is the CFO of Bob Wallace Appliance here in Huntsville. They married in 2020, and they have 4 children, Samantha, Jack, Carson, and Dylan. We had a lovely conversation in Angie's beautiful home, and I learned a lot. This is something that I really don't know anything about, so please enjoy my conversation with Angie Carmody. Angie Carmody, welcome to Knowledgeable Provider. Thank you so much for your time. I'm so appreciative of you doing this.
Absolutely. I'm excited.
You have a very interesting job, a very interesting career. And the more that I study and try to learn about it, the more I realize I don't know anything about what you do at all. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about it.
Oh, absolutely.
So how did you get into your field?
It was in college. I went to Indiana University, and it's a little weird because I was in my senior year, and the only thing that I was missing from my schedule were electives. I had to have more electives. When I went to register for classes, there were 2 possible electives. There was bowling and American Sign Language. I always wonder what would have happened if I had taken bowling, but thankfully I chose sign language, and I just loved it. I don't know what it was, but it was fate. I was meant to take that class. I had a great instructor. She had deaf parents, so
Okay.
She taught deafness. She taught sign language from, you'd say, CODA perspective, the child of deaf adult, like the movie that they won some Oscars last year, I think, or 2 years ago. She taught us the best way possible, which is pretty much without talking. I mean, we learned through being in it, and she would give us finger spelled tests and things, and her parents would come and visit us sometimes, and of course we'd be so nervous, like, oh my gosh, we're gonna meet actual deaf people. And I loved it, and so I took only 2 classes of that, the first semester and second semester of my senior year, and that's when I knew that's what I wanted to do. So
Wow.
I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life until my senior year in college.
Wow.
I know,
How about that?
it's crazy.
Wow.
So I took a year off and worked, and I knew I wanted to go to Gallaudet, which Gallaudet is a fantastic university for anybody interested in any kind of deaf studies. They actually have a kindergarten through PhD program.
Wow. Okay.
On their campus.
Okay.
During that year, I applied and I got in, and that's where it started.
I love that a class pushed you in that direction. Were there any? Oh, I wanted to ask: are there any offensive terms for deaf or hearing impaired people? Like, what's the right terminology to use?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be a very individual kind of choice. A lot of deaf people they're just like, call me deaf. I'm deaf.
Okay.
And then I think people who lose their hearing later on in life, I think they kind of prefer hard of hearing.
Okay.
And I guess you can get technical and say, well, most people have a little bit of hearing, so you can call everybody hard of hearing if you want. But it is the kind of question I think you could ask an individual and just respect what they prefer. But the old time terms of, deaf and dumb, that's, and I still hear people use that sometimes.
Really?
Usually, a couple generations ago. And my grandmother used the term, and I had to ask her very delicately, please. Yeah. And I know historically, dumb didn't mean lacking intelligence. It meant someone who didn't speak. But that's obviously changed. And so now the connotation is really negative. So we wouldn't want to do that. Wouldn't want to use that term. And what's the other one? The
mute.
Deaf mute.
Yeah.
And I just heard somebody use that within the last year.
Really? Okay.
But that's just not even accurate. If you know any deaf person, they are not mute.
Sure.
They laugh. They speak some. Generally, they're not mute.
Sure.
If they're mad, they're not mute. You'll know. So yeah, just the general emotional sounds and things that people make. So that one's out. That's for sure.
So if I just use the term deaf through this interview, I'm not going to get canceled or anything. That's okay.
You will not be canceled.
Okay, that's okay. But that's interesting to know. You could ask an individual instead of just making an assumption.
And I think that's a good thing to do. That just shows that you're respecting the person and not making an assumption.
Which is true for all kinds of different demographics and
isn't that true?
Traits and character. We should all probably just learn to do that with everybody. Pronouns, whatever.
Well, and that's so true. Yeah, it kind of falls into that category. You're right.
And I would imagine working in the school system for so long, you probably have to adapt to all kinds of different situations like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of the respect issues that as an interpreter you have to kind of navigate, because some teachers are, pretty comfortable. They know it's different, but they're okay with it. They're just like, well, yeah, so they're deaf. I'm still going to talk to them and include them. And then on the other side, you have teachers who are really scared. Like, you can tell they're so uncomfortable. And so then it's kind of my job to try to navigate that and try to put the student and the teacher communicating a little bit more one-on-one with me, not being too involved, if that makes sense. I want them to be the focus and not me.
I don't know if this is correct or not, but one of the things that always shows up in the medical textbooks during training is when you're working with an interpreter, you should always talk directly to the patient and not the interpreter.
Oh, that seems so basic, but it's so easy for the hearing person to speak to the other hearing person.
Right.
And I understand that, but with teachers, it really does get difficult. And I'm focusing on, teachers more because that has been my job for a long time now.
Sure.
But to just try and encourage the teacher, please talk to the student. It's about the student. It's not about me.
Sure.
But so many times you hear teachers say, and it's not their fault. It's just like the comfort level. But they'll say, tell her this, tell him that. And, I try at the beginning of the year to say, oh, well, you can tell the student, just talk to the student. I'm just here, giving the information back and forth. I'm here for you. Just please talk to the student. So you're absolutely right.
I definitely haven't followed that rule all the time.
I totally get it.
Because, you feel like really you're communicating through the the interpreter.
Yeah.
And I'm mostly talking about language, non-deaf language, barrier kind of situations.
Right. It's just so natural because that person can hear you.
Right. Sure.
And it's just so easy to go to that person and go, oh, yeah, I need to focus on the patient or the student. Yeah.
Sure.
I know it's hard.
One of the first things you taught me right off the bat when we were talking about this is the difference in an interpreter and a translator, because I think I was calling you a translator at first, but you're an interpreter.
And yeah, there's a little difference. I definitely respect both sides of it. A transliterator is literally taking word for word and putting that into sign to sign, while an interpreter is taking the message and interpreting it, kind of changing it into the other language in the best way that they can. And that might include eliminating some of the words or some of the information that's not important, if you know what I mean. Like a lot of teachers or lecturers will repeat themselves. And if they say the same thing 3 times in a row, well, that might give the interpreter a chance to go back and emphasize something that maybe they didn't get before. It's very fluid.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes sense, but transliterating is more word, while interpreting is more take the message, change it a little bit to make sure that you're making it as clear as possible for your audience. And we all, through COVID, we saw a lot of interpreters on TV talking about, COVID, and we see it on weather disasters and stuff. There's always the interpreter right there. And so that's what we're used to seeing. We're used to seeing the expressive interpreting, the signing of it, but you have to remember that there's also the receptive part. So if a deaf person is signing, I'm taking it in and also interpreting. So with both those areas, the expressive and the receptive, you have to bring in the language, whether it's through eyes or ears. Your brain has to take it, make meaning out of it, process it, change it, so your audience can understand it in the best possible way, and then produce it. And I think the most interesting thing is that while you're doing all that, there's more information coming in while you're processing, while you're giving the information. And it's this circle of constant information. So I think it's kind of fascinating.
It is.
I've always thought that, like spoken language interpreting, you hear it, you process it, you give it, and then you wait for the next chunk of information. There's not a lot of that constant flow of information, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
So with sign language interpreting, the information is constantly coming in while you're constantly processing and constantly. So while I'm signing, I have to hear it, the next part, process it, and give that.
It sounds impossible.
Thank you. That's what I think too. It uses every bit of the brain. I will say that. If there's a long lecture in biology followed by a long lecture in history, I'm done. My brain is done. But I love seeing interpreters who are good and you just see they're with it. They got it. They got it going. And I don't know. There's something about it. I love it.
That's awesome. It's awesome too that you could still be that passionate about your work after almost 30 years now.
It's been a long
right?
time. Yeah. It has been a long
that.
time. Yeah. I like it. Maybe it's because I get summers off. I don't know.
Sure. How much of a delay would you say there is between what the speaker's saying and like how long does all that take? Or how far behind can you get without just losing the train?
That's a really good question, because there's a lot of research that goes into telling interpreters and it's called lag time, how much lag time is ideal to process and get the information out accurately. And I don't remember the exact time that you want to be behind, but you want to be behind about like a sentence or so. Because sometimes when people start talking, they don't know exactly where they're going yet. A teacher will start lecturing and you have no idea what they're talking about. Like you have to wait for maybe 3 sentences to even say, oh, we're talking about cell division.
Okay.
Okay, we're talking about cell division. Now I have some context of what we're doing. So yeah, that lag time is important in order to give your brain the chance to take in the information and understand it for yourself. If you can't understand what it is, then you can't give it to your audience. And yet, I've realized throughout the years that if I'm really tired, my lag time is terrible. I'm like right up against the speaker because my brain is tired and I'm not processing things as quickly. And so I'm just trying to interpret like every word when I know that it's better for my brain and for my audience to have the lag time more.
Okay.
I know that's kind of weird, but when you're tired, your processing isn't as good.
Got you.
So, but yeah, that was a really good question.
That was a really good answer.
I hope so.
I guess it would help me to understand too. You're not spelling every word, right? There's all kinds of different signs for different, like, how does that work?
Actually, I was talking to my husband earlier about it, and he said one of the things that surprised him the most when we started talking about my job and what I do is that it's not English on the hands. It's not just somebody talking and me taking every word and fingerspelling, or even there's not a sign for every English word.
Okay.
So that's where the interpreting comes in. One word that we do not have a direct sign for is weapon, just as an example. There's no sign for weapon. So you have to sign like gun, knife, etc. That's kind of what you would do for a weapon, unless it's like war weapons, and you would give different examples of that.
Okay.
And it drives me crazy. It's like, why do we not have a sign for this? Because it's used, often enough. So yeah, it's not word for word for word. It's not English word for a sign all the time. And actually, sign language is a little bit more, the structure is a little bit more like French or Spanish than it is English.
There was a little audio glitch here that I couldn't figure out how to fix, and I think it was too important to get rid of. So the example she gave is that in English, we might say the red ball, whereas in French or Spanish or sign language, the adjective would come after the noun. So instead, it would be the ball red.
And that's how sign language is. You talk about what you're talking about, and then you describe it.
Okay.
So yeah, there are a lot of different things that come into play when you're interpreting. You want to give your audience the main idea of what you're talking about, and then give the details.
Since there's American Sign Language, I'm assuming there are different versions of sign language, different sign languages.
Yeah, absolutely right. I actually looked it up when I knew I was going to do this. I was like, I actually don't know how many sign languages there are. So I looked it up. There are over 300.
Wow.
I used to do presentations in the community to just give information about deafness and, deaf awareness. And my favorite example is that you would think British Sign Language and American Sign Language would have something in common since we both speak English.
Sure.
They're totally different.
Okay.
They're totally different. American Sign Language, as you say, the alphabet, and, it's a one-handed alphabet, the ABC, blah, blah, blah. And in British Sign Language, they have two-handed alphabets, or the alphabet is using two hands.
Okay.
Totally different. I love stuff like that.
Absolutely. How would that work as far as, so let's say you did speak French. If you're listening to a French speaker and interpreting for someone, is there a direct, can you go from French to American Sign Language, or do you have to have a different?
That would be fascinating. That person would get paid really well. I had my internship in California, and of course, a lot of Spanish speakers in California, and it wasn't as rare to find an interpreter who could speak English, speak Spanish, sign in American Sign Language, and have some kind of a Spanish sign language. And I was just like, you're amazing.
That seems like it would take 3 or 4 people to do that.
And sometimes you do have to bring in, other interpreters, but some of these interpreters, especially with speaking Spanish, speaking English, and American Sign Language, that was the kind of the trifecta of the perfect sign language interpreter in Fremont, which is where I went. I was like, man, I'd love to be able to do that, but I can't. At least not yet. Not
Sure.
yet.
That's a lot for one person to be doing.
Isn't that
yes.
Your brain has to then take pretty much 3 different languages and make it work for, the parent, the student, the teacher, whoever you're talking to. I was in awe.
That is a ton of mental effort and talent and training.
Yeah.
As far as the training for what you do, is it similar? in our medical world, you have the classroom part and then you go do your clinicals and then maybe there's an internship or a residency or whatever. Is that the same kind of deal?
Yeah, I had a little practicum when I was still at Gallaudet, which was, a couple of semesters working with other deaf kids. In my instance, it was, I worked in a middle school for a little bit, and then I drove out to Manassas, Virginia, and I worked in a vocational rehab office for a little while. So that was, meeting a lot of deaf people, getting the skills, figuring out this whole career of, at that point, I thought career counseling is what I was going to do. And then went out to California for my internship, worked with students there. And I knew I still wasn't ready. I knew my skills were just, because again, I had only had 1 year of sign language in college and 2 years at Gallaudet. It's not enough. I mean, it takes, how long does it take to become, I'll just say somewhat fluent in another language. I would say it took probably 5 years until I felt like my confidence was a tiny bit better. I mean, my confidence still isn't, where I would love it to be, but, it's my second language and it always will be. I can't, change that.
The more I talk to people who have a lot of experience in things, the more I find that a lot of people will say, oh, still good days. But, I still sometimes I don't know anything. I know that's true for me.
It does happen to you.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're like, what did I get myself into?
You mentioned that you used to go around and kind of do some education about deafness in general. Do you want to talk about what are the different considerations for a child who's born deaf versus one who, loses their hearing later in life after they already know the language? Or what are some developmental things affecting deaf kids that maybe we wouldn't think about?
That's a good topic because it's so hard for parents. They don't know if their baby is deaf. And if the parents aren't deaf themselves, how are they going to know until, I know they have those tests right when a baby's born, but a lot of times parents don't find out until the child is maybe 1 or 2. It's like, oh, maybe they're just a little bit delayed in language, but they're missing so much of the language development in those early months and years. And if you can imagine, if a deaf child has deaf parents, they're probably going to develop really naturally because the deaf parents are going to be, but how often does that happen? Not very often. Usually deaf kids have hearing parents, and the hearing parents have no idea. They're not going to start communicating in sign language with their kids. So the development of language can be so, it's so delayed, because sometimes, and I've seen kids that aren't identified until they're in kindergarten.
Wow.
I know. And it's really sad because then they don't really have a base language. And if you don't have a base language, how are you supposed to learn from there? That just breaks my heart because from what I understand, and I don't, I'm not an expert on this part of it, but I think there is a kind of a window for language learning. And the older you get, that window starts to close. It's like your brain isn't receptive to learning language the later it takes. And, some of these kids have, maybe they have family who speaks Spanish, but the school system is teaching English when they really should have been learning sign language. And then what do you do?
Yeah,
it's like,
right.
It's just, you're really stuck.
Yeah, you're starting way behind the 8 ball there if you make it that long.
But if you have deaf parents who have a deaf kid, well, hey, they're going to do everything that parents do. They're going to get the books out. They're going to sign stories to them. They're going to have the natural language development. But again, that's so rare that,
Just saying that the parents know immediately when the child's born that they're deaf.
Mm-hmm.
Is the timeline for language development about the same still as a hearing person?
I think so. I'm definitely not an expert on that area, but it certainly helps.
Mm-hmm.
And, you have some doctors think that learning sign language is going to delay English learning. And from a lot of things that I've read, I just don't think that's true. Because again, if you have a language, you can learn another language. So even if it's sign language, it's a language. It's a growing, evolving language, just like any other. But if a doctor is telling the parents, don't try not to use sign language because they really need to learn English, well, then we're not working on the same page. Like we got to get that kid language,
right. Sure.
But yeah, I've seen that happen a couple of times, and that scares me to think, we just need to make sure the child can communicate, and that the parents are open to learning sign language, ideally, But, I understand a lot of hearing parents want their kid to hear. That's natural. They want to feel like they're, they can communicate the way that they're comfortable communicating. So then they, of course, they're going to go the hearing aid route and the cochlear implant route. And I get it, but I would never just say, don't learn sign language. Just use technology and let's see where it goes. Like, let's back it up.
Same idea of just taking like math, for example. The classic question is always, why the heck do I have to learn all this? I have a calculator in my pocket. I think it's good to know the mechanics and the basics.
Yes, yeah, because it leads to other information. It leads to more learning. Learning leads to more learning, right? I mean,
sure.
Kind of simplistic, but I think that's true.
And I'm sure being dependent on technology is not always a great situation.
Yeah. And you don't know how. I mean, I totally understand. Parents want to give their kids every possible chance that they can. Of course, we would all do that. I would just hate for a parent to think, put all their eggs in the hearing aid basket or all their eggs in the cochlear implant basket. Like, it's going to work. They're going to hear. And, I have seen parents say, don't worry, I don't need to learn sign language because my kid is going to hear. And that's like, oh, that breaks my heart.
I hope you're right.
Yeah, let's have a backup plan. Let's, and it's not a backup plan. It's a really good plan. It's like, it's called communication.
Do you want to talk more about the technology? I'm sure you've seen that change a lot over your career.
Oh, yeah. Do you remember seeing TTYs? I don't know if you ever had those in your office or anything, but
I've seen the abbreviation, but I have no idea what.
Okay, cool.
I have no idea what that actually is.
Oh, that's funny. Because it's old technology before smartphones and stuff. It was this little box that you would take the landline and put it on top of, and somehow the electronic signals would transmit your typing to the other person who had a TTY. It's like two people have to have a TTY to make it work. So it's basically just a typed phone call.
Okay. It's a text message.
It is. Yeah, it really was, except it was much more cumbersome. Like, you had to have your little TTY box. It was like a 12 by 12 square that, you had to have the landline, and you would just type what, so conversations would take a long time.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah. So thankfully, smartphones have gotten pretty much rid of that older technology. And like you said, we were talking about hearing aids and cochlear implants. Those have come such a long way, which is fantastic. I mean, hearing aids used to just be an amplifier and that was it. Now they can adjust it and, get the trebles and the basses, and the background noise can even kind of go away a little bit. It's come so far. You can adjust it with your phone. You can with your app. You can change. My dad has that now, which is great. He can literally turn it off if he doesn't want it through his phone. He can turn it up or down or change the background noise. What they've done with that is tremendous.
Super cool.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have feelings about they recently made it where you don't have to have a prescription to buy hearing aids? How do you feel about that?
Well, I don't know if you're going to get the same quality that way. I think with those, and I don't know much about it, I'm just saying, but as far as I know, those are more of just like amplifiers. And so if you go to a restaurant, you don't want to hear the clanking around of the dishes and the silverware, and you don't want to hear the background conversations, but all of that's going to be amplified. From what I understand, if you don't go to an audiologist who's licensed and they can work with you, figure out where, because, nobody hears the same. A lot of teachers or doctors will ask me, how much does this patient or student hear? Well, I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, I've known some deaf people a very long time, but it doesn't matter how well you know somebody, you still don't know how they hear.
You can't hear what they hear, right?
Because, and everybody's different. So I just think it's, having an audiologist who can really hone into the areas where a certain person is lacking in their hearing and can adjust it really, really well. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I could trust an over-the-counter hearing aid.
I've still been recommending to my patients, you should really go to an audiologist.
Yay, you got it.
I feel like you get what you pay for with something like that. Yeah.
And I know it's expensive, and I know insurance doesn't help much at all, if at all.
Sure.
I mean, I think it's helping a little bit now, but they're really expensive, like thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah. But how, what's a cent's worth?
Exactly. Exactly. It took my dad many years to finally take that step. And I'm so glad he did, because, now he doesn't have to be looking straight at my face to talk. And I knew this for years, but, parents can be stubborn sometimes.
For sure. Yes. We see couples fairly often in the same room, and it's kind of interesting when one of them can't hear and the other one, you can tell it drives the other one crazy. And there's all kinds of weird dynamics that pop up there.
That's so true. And I bet you hear people say, oh, he or she just has selective hearing.
Yeah, everyone said, yeah, that's where we start with everybody.
Yes. Like, no, please understand, nobody can hear through a wall. So, when I yell for him and, he doesn't show up, well, no, he really didn't hear you. Probably. Well, I'll say probably.
Maybe, yeah, most likely, yes.
We're not going to put a whole, 100% on that, but.
Yeah, the dynamics are fascinating. I'm sure you have a ton of stories about seeing that with kids and parents and all the different populations you've worked with. I'm sure it's all over the map.
Yeah, you do see a lot of time. There's a certain look of, since I work mostly with students, I'll be interpreting, I'll giving it my best, and I'm like, hey, I think this is good. I think I'm getting the point across. I think it's good. Cell division, yeah, we got this. And then I look at the student, I'm like, did you understand that? And I'll get a deer in the headlights. A little bit. We're like, oh, okay. We got to go back. We got to back up and, find the missing parts. Yeah. A lot of deaf and hard of hearing people do that kind of smile and nod.
Okay.
That, yeah, I understand. I get it. And if I dig deep enough, I'll get that. Well, maybe not. Maybe I didn't get a lot of it. So, and that's important. That's why I'm there. That's the whole point. I need to make sure that the information gets to the student.
Do you ever find yourself more in the role of tutor? Like not just passing the message along, but really like doing more of the teacher job?
That does happen. I'm kind of adamant when somebody just says I'm a teacher. I go, no. I don't do, I'm teachers do so much. I'm not a teacher, but the teachers who get to know me and see what I do, they're like, girl, you're a teacher. Sure. I'm like, well, yeah, in some ways I'm kind of a language teacher to my student, depending on the age. And I do understand that. But to your point, if I see the math lesson and I know how the teacher taught it and the student is having trouble, I'm not going to get the teacher to come over every single time. Okay. If I truly understand. Now, when we're getting up in the grades and we're starting to talk about, certain geometrical formulas and things like that, and if I really don't understand it, there's no way I'm going to even try. I'm like, teacher, we need help. But yeah, the tutoring does definitely come into play. It has to. I
can see where that'd be a blurred line.
Yes.
And I'm sure the students look at you, not the teacher.
Right, because I'm there.
Just like going the other way, right?
Yeah. And if, sometimes if the student has a question and I'm pretty confident that I could help, but I know that they haven't communicated that much, I will purposefully say, why don't you ask the teacher? Because I don't want to just be, it's important for the student to have communication with the other teachers too. So, and that's important. So I try to encourage that. Depending on the student, depending on the situation, if the teacher's busy or whatever it is. But yeah, I like to see the student and the teacher communicating. And of course I'm there, interpreting whatever the question and the answer is, but I like to see them interact.
I'm married to a teacher and I've seen, first of all, my hat's off to you and everybody else who works in education, because I had no idea what you all have to deal with.
I only have one student.
Sure. But sometimes there's some blame that comes the teacher's way. Do you ever feel like you're getting blamed for it's your fault the child doesn't understand something? I
have seen that. I hadn't thought about that. But yeah, that every so often if the student doesn't do well at all, the teacher, who do they look at? Me. Oh, what happened? Or, the student didn't turn in their homework. They look at me. Oh, what happened? And I will interpret that. What happened? And I'll say that to the student. Like, this is on you.
Gotcha.
It's not me. The teacher's looking at me saying, what happened? I'm looking at the student. What happened? Where'd it go? What'd you do? So it's got, I'm always very aware of where I fit in and always trying to make sure that I'm not the focus, if that makes sense. Yeah. I don't want to be the focus. It's them. They're the focus.
It seems like you're on a tightrope constantly.
A little bit.
Continuous position all the time.
A little bit.
Yeah.
And sometimes other students who are just in the classroom will think that I'm more of a teacher than I am, if that makes sense. And they'll come up to me, hey, can I go to the bathroom? I'm like, I don't know, ask the teacher. I try to like make that boundary so all the other students don't come to me for other things. And I don't want to sound selfish or anything like that, but it can be a real distraction. Like I'm literally focusing on my students, sometimes two, but it's a very small number of students, usually one. And if kids are coming up to me asking all kinds of, can I have a pencil? Where are the crayons? Where, I can't do my job. Sure. So I probably don't seem real friendly at the beginning of the school year, but it's just very purposeful because I need to set some boundaries right off the bat. And that's for the teacher and the students. Like I need the teacher to know I'm not there to make copies. I'm not there to run errands. I'm there for one reason. And I've definitely had teachers to assume that I was their assistant.
Interesting.
And we gotta nip that in the bud,
for sure.
And I usually just say, well, I can't leave my student. And you never want to say, that's not my job. Because that sounds it makes people defensive. But if you say, I can't leave my student because they might miss something and I'm sorry, I can't do that. Then they kind of go, oh yeah, she's here for one reason. Okay. Like, yeah.
Do you get assigned a student for the whole year and you're just with that student, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's been the case since I've been in Alabama. And every year I'm always a little unsure, like, will administration want to put me with somebody else? Will there be any changes? But usually, I talk to my boss about the needs, and my boss will say, well, are you happy where you are? Do you think this is the best for the student? And I will let her know. I think this is probably the best situation right now. And, my student is, eventually they're going to graduate. So, and then what do I do? Okay. I might go back to elementary school. I might go, wherever the needs are. But yeah, that's something that all our interpreters, there's only 4.
For all of Huntsville City?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, just 4 hired interpreters, but we do have some contract interpreters that come in and help. But yeah, we all have our placements, and it can change, depending on, who's coming in and who's leaving. It's kind of interesting because, I've gone through pretty much every grade now. And to go back to elementary school would be a big change because now I'm in high school. It wouldn't be a bad thing. It would just be different.
Have you ever been with the same student through their entire educational career? No,
I haven't gone that far. The longest was about 4 or 5 years. But yeah, it's interesting. And then, when you have a new student, you have to kind of get used to a new signing way. Nobody signs exactly the same.
Okay.
So you have to kind of get used to the new way, and they have to get used to you. There's that time of, I guess, transition where you just have to get used to each other and how you sign and where things are lacking. There's students that are still learning. But yeah, I've been through pretty much every grade now. It's crazy.
I would imagine you end up kind of developing a relationship with each other as you go through. Do you still stay in contact with former students and that kind of thing?
A little bit. I don't get real social with the students. Again, I always feel like I'm there for a very specific purpose, and that's so the student can have more information from their environment and other people. So I kind of take that seriously.
That's great.
I hope it is. Of course I ask, how was your weekend, and tell me about your birthday party, and all those kinds of things that we talk about for sure. But as far as outside of school, not too much. I follow one of my first student that I ever interpreted for in Alabama. She's got a family now, and It's just really cool. So I get to kind of keep in touch with her. But yeah, we're not best buds or anything.
Sure, got you.
Yeah.
I don't know if you feel the same way, but I know with my patients, it feels right to keep a little professional distance there. Not get too close.
Yeah, you want that buffer
Mm-hmm.
because you're still a professional.
Sure.
And I mean, I guess on some rare occasion you might end up having, dinner with a former patient. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that happens or not.
It'd have to be a pretty special patient.
I can
No
see
offense
that.
to any of my patients who are listening.
No, but there's just, I feel the same way. I mean,
Yeah.
the people that I've worked with have been fantastic, but there's just that little bit of that buffer.
Yeah. It's your job.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, it is your job.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you don't enjoy the people you work with because that's why we do what we do. But yeah, just, and, I'm working with kids too. So,
Sure.
They have their life to,
Right.
And I'm tired at the end of the day.
Yes. Right. You have worked in some medical situations, right?
Yes.
How is that from your perspective, or what would you like healthcare people to know about communicating with the deaf?
Well, yeah, when I was a case manager at the Alabama Institute for Deaf and Blind, that came up a lot of times. Doctors would be upset that they had to pay for an interpreter. But as part of the ADA, it's the law. I would always say, well, you would never question putting in a wheelchair ramp. So an interpreter is also providing access for the deaf patients. And quite honestly, do you really want to sit in the examining room writing notes? How long is that going to take? If you don't have an interpreter, how else are you going to communicate? And how long is it going to take? You're actually going to probably save money by getting an interpreter in, getting the questions answered, getting everything that you need to tell your patient. And I don't know for sure, but I think there's some kind of a tax benefit. I'm not sure, but interpreters are so important. Okay, here's an example. You don't want a 9-year-old hearing kid to be the interpreter for their parents.
Right.
That's not what you want.
Right. And we run into that a lot, because I used to work, I was a paramedic, and then I worked in more, acute care situations in the hospital, and that we always had access to like language lines and interpreters, but a lot of times that is what happened, because just in the moment, I'm like, we just got to get the message across, however. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. In an emergency, in that kind of situation where you're going into a home and something terrible's happened. Yeah. You have no choice. You use what you have. I mean, that's just what we have to do. But if you set an appointment, you go in and, we have VRI now, the video relay interpreting, where you have the interpreter on a monitor. It's not the same. Like, there's a delay. There can be glitches. It can freeze up. Sure. And in a medical situation, it's not ideal. But I know a lot of hospitals are using that.
Are there services available that somebody like me, just in an outpatient setting, could utilize without any kind of pre-negotiated contract or anything?
As far as I know, you can call some of the agencies in town. I mentioned Alabama Institute for Deaf and Blind. They have a list of contract interpreters and a staff interpreter on hand. And then there's another agency called Deaf Access. The school system contracts with them. So, there are those are the two kind of big ones in Huntsville that people tend to go to when they need an interpreter. And we don't have enough interpreters. So sometimes appointments have to be delayed because of it, which is unfortunate. When I'm going to be out, and I know I'm going to be out, I try to get my request in for an interpreter like months ahead. It's not easy.
Any tips in general for communicating with deaf people if you don't know sign language?
That's another good question. I would kind of go back to the idea of asking the deaf person. Like, when you run into a deaf person, I think it's easy for hearing people to get very like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? But to try to remember that that's every day for the deaf person. Like, that's their reality. They're always having to have a little bit of struggle in communicating. So whether they get their smartphone out and start typing, and, you can go back and forth and type a conversation, or we all kind of do this gesturing kind of thing sometimes, and that's okay. And, deaf people have some read lips somewhat okay, but reading lips, I think, is impossible. I don't know how anybody can read lips. And that's another question a lot of people say, oh, can he or she read lips? I'm like, I really can't answer that because I don't even know how anybody can, but some people are better at it than others. So yeah, it depends. It's all these like dependent things that kind of wrap around communication, and just kind of go with it and see how the deaf person wants to communicate.
Sure.
I know that's not a specific answer.
It can't be. It's every situation is different,
Yeah, you're right.
And that's pretty much just what I've done when I've had to deal with deaf folks as patients, but you just kind of just make it work.
Yeah, you make it work, whether it's writing or typing or just talking to, just making it work.
Well, what's the thing? 90 whatever % of communication is nonverbal anyway. So
Yeah,
you can normally
that's true.
Figure it out.
The basic stuff you can figure out. The really deep down important stuff, yeah, I wouldn't take that chance and get that interpreter in there.
Do you have a lot of experience working with kids with the cochlear implants or adults?
A little bit. A lot of times the kids that get cochlear implants, their parents don't really want them to use interpreters anymore. And that's kind of controversial. Again, it's a language. We can have English and sign language. There was one kid many, many years ago who just got 2 cochlear implants. And the parents felt very strongly that he shouldn't watch me. I was interpreting for another student in the classroom, but the student that just got the cochlear implants would watch me. And I think he would benefit by hearing a little bit of what the teacher's saying, watching some of the sign language, but the parents felt very strongly, no more interpreter. And so then it made it very awkward because then the teacher would say, do not look at the interpreter. Do not. Don't look at her.
That is, challenging.
Made me feel terrible. Like the student just wants to get a little bit more information. And I'm, what am I going to say? I can't fight with the teacher. I can't say, oh my God, but the teacher felt terrible too. So sometimes you get into some really sticky situations with technology and you have to respect what the parents want to do. But I would hope that, most parents would just want to give everything. Don't limit, don't block any form of communication. If they can all come together, let's see what works. But yeah, that was a tough one.
That is awkward. Yeah. Oh. That's a tricky situation.
Yeah. I felt so bad, but that's only one time in I think 30 years.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
we have a friend that her son is deaf and he's an adult. He actually works as an aircraft mechanic for one of the big airlines. Cool. And he has the cochlear implant, but I've never communicated with him about it, but he doesn't use it. I don't know if he doesn't like it or if I don't know what, but he still signs and uses his phone a lot to communicate.
Yeah. And I know, like when I was at Gallaudet, a lot of students would kind of rebel against the technology. Okay. They'd be like, I am not a cochlear implant user. I am I'm a sign language user. Students would say, I'm big D deaf. I'm like culturally deaf, like capital DEAF. So, cochlear implants gone, they rebel against that sometimes. And so I'd be curious to know what happened if that was more of like, I'm not that person, or maybe it's just annoying. I don't know. I'd be curious to find out. Are you going to ask him?
Yeah, I might.
Yeah. You can say that it was a question from me if you want to take responsibility.
Oh, I don't mind. I'm sure he's answered the same question 1,000 times.
Probably. You're right. Yeah.
Do you ever think about losing your own hearing?
I do. Yeah. I really do. I have tinnitus, or tinnitus, as some people say. So I always have ringing in my ears. And every so often I think it does affect how I hear during a classroom situation. And so, I never used to think about that. Like, what would happen if I started to lose my hearing? I can't do my job anymore. Oh my gosh. Or I'd have to find another path to do it or something. But yeah, I have thought about that. And, there were some clients that I worked with who are both deaf and blind, which of course that's tough. Oh, I'll give you a little anecdote. This was kind of cute. I had a very adorable older couple clients when I worked at Alabama Institute for Deaf and Blind. The woman, I think she'd always been deaf, but she lost her vision through many years. And the way that she signed phone was like one of the Little House on the Prairie phones. Like it had the voice part and the earpiece separately.
Yes, right.
And she used that sign for phone. And I was like, oh, that's the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life. Oh my gosh. I got such a kick out of that. But that's an example of how sign language is a true language. It has evolved. It used to be Little House on the Prairie phone. And now it's like what you would normally just kind of show as the phone piece on your ear and towards your mouth. And now I think that's changing to how we hold a cell phone. So language evolves and sign language evolves. So
That is fascinating.
Again, I love the linguistics of sign language.
If someone is interested in doing what you do as a career, what path should a person take? Like, how does a person get into that?
Well, I've mentioned AIDB a few times, Alabama Institute for Deaf and Blind, and I know they have classes. They have for years and years. They have instructors, and that's a good place to start. I'm sure there are some other classes out in the community, but that's the one that, I work there, so I know that they have some good classes. Some are taught by deaf people, which I would totally encourage. Again, total immersion. That's how we learn, sink or swim. You gotta get out there and just do it. And then there's some online classes, but we know language is between people. It's not, learning online is not the best way to learn a language, but it's a good place to start. And, you can look up different courses. There are some universities around. I know some people go to Troy University. I'm not saying that their program is perfect. I don't know enough about it. Honestly, I just want to, kind of make that clear. If anybody has a chance to go to Gallaudet, they provide a master's or PhD program for hearing people. And for deaf and hard of hearing people, it's, like I said, like kindergarten through PhD. I think they might have some online classes as well. And they might be able to provide a little bit more, maybe one-on-one through technology. Again, it's about that back and forth of communicating. It's hard to really learn by a static video. Even though that's how I started to learn that way. And there's nothing wrong with that. Dictionaries are fine too, but you can't, it's one-dimensional. The best way is to go to some of the, deaf get-togethers. They have little coffee get-togethers, and you can, once you learn a little bit, you can go and just kind of throw yourself out there and start learning the language by getting together and having a cup of coffee with some people too.
Other than the school system, where else do interpreters work?
Definitely medical, ER visits. I've done a few freelance jobs on the Arsenal. Definitely some deaf employees out there. Job training, job interviews, college courses, of course. Award ceremonies. I did one NASA award ceremony that I was really excited to do it. I didn't know it was going to last over 2 hours, and I didn't have a backup. Usually if an assignment goes longer than, I'm going to say an hour or so, you really need a team. Like, you need to. If it's a constant, lecture, award ceremony, constant information, you give yourself about 20, 30 minutes of pure concentration, and then you start to slip. Like, your brain just can't keep processing. And, it gets to be almost impossible. And I went to that award ceremony not knowing I was going to be up on stage with the spotlight, and it was going to go over 2 hours. Wow. I thought I was just going to crumble into a little puddle. And towards the end of it, I had the impression, okay, we're wrapping up. Oh, thank God, I can go. My brain is mush. And then the person came out to the podium and said, and finally, we have an inspirational singer coming out. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Nobody told me. Nobody gave me any information about this. Man. So then the lights go down, but my spotlight stays right on. I'm like, this is really not good.
Wow.
And I just pretended like I was, an artistic interpreter, singing the song, signing the song with the singer. And I walked out of there like a zombie. I would just wanted to crawl in a hole.
I bet. Yes.
My brain was complete mush. But I let the agency know that it was a tough one, and they should probably know to get a couple interpreters next time.
I teach over at Calhoun in the evenings, and we have these classes are like 3 or 4 hour lectures, and even just talking, just at the end of that, I'm like,
right?
I can't talk to you anymore.
Like, everybody get away from me. That's a long time.
Yeah.
That's a long time. Like, even like field trips are fun in schools. You bring the kids and you go to a museum. And there was one time we went to, I think it was a Cook's Museum. It was all
in Decatur, yeah.
Yeah. It was a long day. And I got back on the bus and I was sitting next to a teacher and I was like, my brain is so dead. Like I am, my brain is mush right now. And she said, now you know how I feel every day. I was like, you don't get it. Oh my gosh, you don't get it. I just had to interpret an entire museum tour and I don't know what I'm talking about. I have no idea what I don't know what's coming. And yet I'm talking about prehistoric animals and bugs and names of things that I don't know. And I was like, I didn't say that to her, but in my mind, I was just like, wow, you don't know what I do. At least you know what you're saying. You know what you're talking about in class.
Right, exactly.
Anyway, that's just another interpreting kind of weird thing that happens.
All kinds of huge challenges that you wouldn't think about.
Yeah, like spelling a prehistoric animal bug or something. Like, hold, what's that? How do you spell that? What?
Okay, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. This is probably this is probably a Weasley question, but
that's funny.
Are you ever tempted to just leave things out?
Yeah.
Do you ever just go, yeah, no, we're not doing that?
Oh, every so often. That's a very fair question. Totally fair. If there's something going on in the classroom and the student looks up and, says, what's going on? Oh, totally. Yeah. I'll say, well, they're having a fight or, they're arguing or, but if something silly is going on and it's not affecting the student at all, I won't get the student's attention just to tell them that somebody asked for a pencil. And some interpreters are very, very adamant about interpreting every single thing. And they will get the student's attention and say, this is not a pencil, asking for a pencil, but they will make sure that everything that they hear is interpreted to the student. And that's fine. I respect that. But when it comes right down to it, we need to get work done. Yeah. And so I will kind of pick and choose on occasion if I know that it's something, completely out of the realm of what's important. So, yeah. So you're right. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you don't want to do anything that would distract the kid from what they're supposed to be doing.
If they're paying attention to something and they're really into something that they're supposed to be doing, why would I say, oh, the teacher just asked the custodian to come clean up a mess? We don't need to go there. But if the student asks specifically, I will say, the teacher just called the custodian to clean up a mess. I mean, it totally depends on, what's going on. As long as that student's looking at me and asking for information, I am right there and I will, the kid in the back is causing trouble. And that's why everybody is looking around, because that's important too. It's the environment, not just what the teacher's saying, because, you want them to be a part of the class.
Are you with your students between classes and at lunch and like other times?
No, thank goodness, because they don't want me in their life that much. Sure. Yeah, they have their lunches to themselves with their friends, and between classes, I might go one way and they'll go another. In the lower grades, the interpreter's more like hands-on, and you do kind of have to make sure that the kid knows what to do and where to go and knows where the bathroom is. Yeah, the younger grades are more intense. You have to be more than an interpreter, and that's just the way it is with young kids. That they're sweet and they need more attention, and the older they get, the less attention they want. Which I have to respect that, and I do. I'm like, we don't have to walk together. You're your own person. So that's just it's interesting to see how the responsibility changes through the years.
I feel like we're probably at a pretty decent place to stop. Is there anything you want to plug? You want to throw out a commercial for your Airbnb or anything?
Ooh, can I?
Yes, of course.
Well, if anybody is looking for a place to stay, which is just an hour away from Huntsville in Town Creek, Alabama, we have a little cabin, my husband and I, called Stay a While, and we are on Airbnb and VRBO. We are totally booked through the entire month of July, but the fall is honestly when I love to be there. It's right on Wilson Lake. It's got a nice deck, and it's a place that you can just hang out and get away from the world, even though it's only about an hour away. So if you look up Town Creek on Airbnb or VRBO, you'll find Stay a While. So, thank you. That was fun to be able to share that. Of course, I didn't even think about that.
I'm not paying you, so, hopefully.
True enough.
Well, yeah, I think that was fantastic. Angie Carmody, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking with you.
And thank you. It was a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Jody.
All right, that does it for this episode of Knowledgeable Provider. I'm your host, Jody Marks. Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your preferred listening platform. Give us a nice 5-star rating and leave a nice review. If you'd like to help support the show, you can do that at patreon.com/knowledgeableprovider. And as always, stay safe, take care of yourself, and take care of your patients in that order.